Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Green Flag. I'm your host, Lukas Wacker. With me, as always, we have Kyle Cushman. And in today's episode, we are partially previewing the British Grand Prix weekend, as a little bit has already unfolded at the time we are recording this, as it is the debut of the sprint weekend format with sprint qualifying, with the regular qualifying that just happened before we recorded this, and then, of course, the usual British Grand Prix on the Sunday. We have a couple of news and notes regarding the 2022 car, which has been finally released and unveiled to the public on the final kind of look of that car for the future of F1, as that was released coming into this weekend, as well as, since it's been a couple of weeks, we are going to a little bit discuss Lewis Hamilton's contract extension in this one, despite that being in the news for the last couple of weeks. But we've got a lot to get to in today's episode. But before we get into all of that, how are you doing today, Kyle?
Yeah, I'm doing good. It was definitely strange to have qualifying on the Fridays, kind of throw me for a bit of a loop in terms of like what day of the week, and it was like at like a normal time for us in North America too.
I know.
Like
I was able to watch
getting up at like 8 a.m. for myself, or even earlier for you. It was 1 p.m. here, so like very, very strange stuff. But doing good. It was fun, definitely, to watch that qualifying session and not be just like barely awake in bed or whatever. But it was a fun session too. But interested to see how things go this weekend. I've definitely made it known that I'm not the hugest fan of the format, but we'll see how it goes, and shaping up to be at least a fascinating British Grand Prix this weekend.
Definitely. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton winning the quote-unquote sprint qualifying pole, if you will, starting on the front row for that. There's a lot of different things, a lot of different terminology that's usually not there on a race weekend that is in effect this weekend. So bear with us if we make any mistakes along the way, but hopefully we do not. But before we get into looking at the weekend itself, we'll talk about the news and notes first off. And we'll start off with the 2022 F1 car being officially unveiled to the public. Looks pretty sporty, gotta say. I like kind of the futuristic look that they've kind of gone with here. Totally different than what we've really seen in the past. Specifically, the wings, both rear and front, look substantially different than what we have currently, with very little tweaks and stuff that teams add. It seems like it's very much a baseline that we've got going on here. Not too much room for aerodynamic improvements from what the regulations are kind of saying, with the cost cap and everything that's coming into effect, obviously. So lots of different moving parts to this, but we'll talk about the car specifically here today, with a lot of different cool features that are debuting or returning for the first time in quite some time. Just a couple of notes here before we get to our comments on it. The car will feature over-wheel winglets for the first time, as well as wheel covers, which is an interesting addition to it. They are 18-inch wheels as well, with low-profile tires. We've seen them test a couple of variations of this tire already on the current day F1 cars. And then it's also going to be run with sustainable fuel, which obviously goes along with F1's Carbon Zero initiative that they have announced over the past year, which is really, really cool to see that they are really being at the forefront of motorsports on that side of things. And then finally, one last bit of interesting note here is that they've gone through over 7,500 simulations to get to this point with this car. We've talked about the next gen car with NASCAR on this show. I bet you it's nowhere near the amount of tests that F1 has done with this car. Of course, both of these generations, with the comparability with NASCAR and F1, they've been extended a year. They were meant to debut in 2021, but due to the COVID-19 pandemic, they've both been pushed back a year. So they've had this little bit of extra time to fine tune everything and get things just right. And you can see that they've taken advantage of that through this simulation time. So lots of different cool things with this car, Kyle. What are your initial thoughts here of the look of it and some of the specs as well?
Yeah, I'm a fan. It looks really, really cool. It kind of looks like an Indy car, to be honest, with some of the front wing and back wing and everything like that. It kind of gives you some Indy car vibes. But I'm a big fan. It was kind of weird trying to get like a true view of how things would look with like the shiny like debut car or whatever. But earlier today, F1 posted like the liveries from this season put on the next gen car, or whatever you want to call it, the 22. And they look pretty damn good. I'm pretty excited to see how they look with the, as you mentioned, the winglets over the tires. It's an interesting add in terms of aerodynamics and what teams are going to do there. And of course, all the teams are going to have their little fun tricks to put on the car. So I'm sure what we get in the liveries from today is absolutely not what the car is going to look like come next year when they're actually on track. But in terms of the sustainable fuel and everything like that, that's really, really cool to see in terms of the changes that they've made for the aerodynamics to make it easier to follow, all these kind of things to promote better racing is awesome to see. And I'm super, super excited for this car. We've seen a lot of teams this season kind of go have towards this season, have towards next season and this next car. Some teams completely throwing away the season, going all into this next generation of car. So I can't wait to see this car on track. It's one thing to see it in the photos, hear people talk about it, read all the specs, all this kind of stuff. I'm not exactly a technical car guy, so a lot of it goes over my head. But if it looks cool, it sounds good, and it races good, I'm going to be a fan.
Yeah, I agree with that. I can't be the most techie guy either in the garage area, but it definitely looks really, really cool. Yeah. I love the way that it's kind of built for the future here, and it's a very trend-worthy kind of car. And as long as it promotes better racing and it does actually excel in that area, not to say that this era has been like terrible per se, but when there's a good race, it's actually a pretty good race with this current generation of car. Just if we can get some more overtaking and some more what's the word I'm looking for here? Just interchangeability amongst competitive amongst the rest of the field.
I think the big thing is just making it easier to follow and not having dirty air be such a big part of the conversation. And dirty air is always going to be part of the conversation. That's just how aerodynamics and racing works. But if you can limit the amount of effect that it has, and so with this current generation of car, it is like the end all be all, the dirty air and everything like that. You can have a car that's a second faster than the car ahead of it, but then when it gets in the dirty air, all of a sudden they can't do anything, depending on the track, of course, and whatnot. It feels like right now it's very much follow as close as you can until you get to the DRS zone and then hope that you get by them into the braking zone. That's kind of what it feels like right now. But with these regulation changes, with the new car, all of these kind of things, with the, like some of the things that they've said, like resulting in a 47% difference in downforce with the car that we currently have this season and going into next year with the dirty air and everything like that. It's really cool to see, and I'm excited to see how that impacts racing, because we will be able to see people follow behind and be able to close in these kind of things, and potentially that creates more passing zones, more passing areas. We won't have to be so heavily reliant on DRS and braking zones and things like that for passing. So obviously the thing that people are hoping for is a closer grid in general and having more interchangeability at the top, more teams competing for victories, more teams competing for the championship. I don't know how much of that we will realistically get, because with the cost cap and everything like that, it'll make things closer, but the cream still rises to the top. So if it just makes for better racing in general, that's going to be great to see. So I don't know when we're going to see these cars first. It's probably not going to be until probably Catalunya again for testing come the beginning of next year. I don't know if we'll get something before that. But I mean, looks good. All the specs look good. Is being developed to help promote sustainability into the future as well. Like it ticks all the boxes. So I'm very excited for this 2022 car.
The numbers are there on paper. Let's hope that translates to real life here. Let's see if the end product does come to fruition here. But they've done a tremendous job from all the things that we've heard. And I'm curious to see what the drivers are going to be saying when they first get behind the wheel of this thing. I think it's always going to be a bit tentative from the beginning with change and wanting to, that time to acclimate yourself with a new car. And it does take time for some guys. I mean, look at the people that have transitioned to new teams this year, namely Daniel Ricciardo. Like that's taken him a while. As soon as he's going to figure this generation of McLaren out, he's going to have to try and refigure it all out amongst everybody else.
At the same time, everybody's going to be in the same boat there, right? Everybody's going to be trying to figure it out. So that battle between what teams get it right, what teams don't, what drivers can figure it out, which ones won't, is going to be really, really interesting. And just finally on this car, I've seen a lot, and obviously when you look at it and you're a North American motorsports fan, it does look like an Indy car. That's not exactly a bad thing, because I don't know about you, but IndyCar racing over these last couple of years has been fantastic, whether that's on ovals
Super
or on road
competitive.
courses as well. It's been super competitive. It's been great racing. And obviously it's very different in terms of the regulations, but in terms of the look and potentially the aerodynamics as well, great racing is great racing. And so I'm excited to see how this plays out. And just finally on it, it is refreshing to hear people go for great racing and not close racing. That's all.
I'm in agreement with you there, Kyle. I mean, I think,
just because it's close doesn't mean it's good.
Exactly. And that's kind of what F1 is right now to an extent when you're close, but it's not necessarily the greatest product on the track. So I am very intrigued. I think F1's handled this the absolute right way. They've gone about it with the right vision and the right intention. So I'm ecstatic to see how these cars perform on track. And I just want to see these guys struggle a little bit. We've had this very much downforce heavy generation of car here where they're like glued to the track. These guys are going to be about 3-4 seconds slower. I think it's estimated to what the current day F1 cars are going to be. So that means a lot more off throttle time, a lot more room for improvement for these guys in the midfield to try and gain on these top teams. So very intrigued with the battles that we're going to see next season and who really nails it out of the gate. Who's going to come out flying? Is it going to be Mercedes once again? And Red Bull, probably they have a good chance with the amount of resources that they have and everything like that. But could somebody come and surprise it?
Yeah,
that's going to be the real thing.
I'm going to toss it on you real quick. So I apologize, or I can go first or whatever. But just with the car being announced and everything, we have the opportunity to put it out now. Who do you think will be the team that maybe excels the most versus this year with the new car into next year? And who do you think will see the biggest decrease into next year?
That's a good question. Damn.
Because I know who I think the team that will increase the most is, but I'm not certain who I think will decrease the most.
Okay. I would lean like Alpine for the one that's going to increase the most, maybe.
Okay.
Because they got really nothing on the line really this season. They knew that they were going to be in the midfield and they can dedicate a lot of time, I think, I think Aston Martin and Alpine, I think those two kind of go hand in hand, just based off of where they are in the midfield, looking to get to that next step. And if they really, because I remember Alpine's Renault and they wanted to be in that top 3, top 4, I would expect them to really want to really hone in on this car and try and improve it, because they don't really have much on the line for this season per se. So if I'm looking at those two teams specifically to really take that next step for 2022.
For me, the team that I think is going to take the biggest step going into next year, and it's fairly straightforward for me, is Williams, actually. I think given the fact that both them and Haas have basically put all the resources into next year's car, given the fact that they've got new management with an influx of cash, that's going to help things out as well. But also the fact that they are no longer doing everything in-house into next year, that they will be accepting parts and whatnot from Mercedes. I think that kind of combination will result in them starting to climb back up the grid a little bit. Now, if that's just to like 7th place, that's still a big upgrade because they don't have points at all. But I think that that's a team that can slowly rise up the grid again. But in terms of falling back, I'm really not too sure where to go. I would maybe lean like maybe a McLaren loses like a bit of a step. Like right now, they're kind of that 3rd best team. And I think it's going to get even closer in the midfield into next year, with certain teams putting more into next year than others. So I could see a team like McLaren maybe falling back from like the like kind of clear cut 3rd best car when they're on their day to maybe being more of a question mark for that and being more of a battle between like them, Ferrari, and like an Alpine or an Aston Martin, something like that.
That's an interesting comment.
I don't know. Is there like an obvious team that's going to like fall back though? Like that, I'm kind of looking at the grid and kind of struggling to think.
I don't think really there's any clear cut team. I mean, you would expect Ferrari to try and get back up there because, that's what their goal's been the last 2 seasons. They've kind of admitted that this last 2 seasons here of this generation of car aren't going to be great for them, even though they've done a nice job recovering this season from 2020. So I'm in agreement with you there. Like, I don't think there's anybody that. Maybe Mercedes, if that's fair to say.
I would actually lean Red Bull more than Mercedes, honestly.
Interesting. One of the top 2 teams, I think they're going to be at a deficit, I think maybe out of the gate next season.
Mm-hmm.
I guess maybe Red Bull, because they did get off to a slower start with this generation to per se. I mean, you can look past the Sebastian Vettel era, but like once he left the team, it was kind of a slow going for. They've had their success once in a while, but it wasn't as what it is in 2021.
Yeah,
Mercedes has been.
It hasn't been drivers' championships until this point. So
yeah, it's difficult to say that, you know, Red Bull could get worse because they've done such a great job to try and take the fight to Mercedes this season.
Yeah, I think the main thing looking at it from that perspective is they do have the opportunity to go for the championship this year, and putting more resources into this year, it potentially takes away from the resources into next year's car, which potentially puts them on the back foot or something like that. But I can't wait to see how it plays out with the new generation of car, because it's been a while. It's basically for the first time since I've become an F1 fan going to be the introduction of a brand new car as well. So I'm excited to see how it spices up the grid.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Glad that they announced it's a perfect weekend to do it for the British Grand Prix, obviously. Exactly. So they timed it perfect.
We got another announcement for the British Grand Prix, but that's okay.
Well, I think we'll get it. We'll get it sooner. We'll get it over the summer break, I believe. Yeah. But the guy is unbelievable, and of course, that is George Russell we are referring to there for that Mercedes seat. But we'll move on to the other Mercedes seat that is not going to be vacated here, Kyle. Lewis Hamilton. I feel like we just kind of talked about this a couple of months ago. He signed a contract extension because he basically did it in January for this upcoming season. But he has signed a 2-year contract extension now with Mercedes to stay in that seat until the end of 2023. Really, really cool to see that Hamilton is committing here for a couple more seasons. Who knows, that may be the end of his F1 journey at the end of 2023. We'll see what the success is like in this next generation of car. But if we say anything from this past weekend, even today in the qualifying, Lewis Hamilton is one determined SOB. So he's fired up, and I love to see it. I'm happy that Hamilton is, you know, finding that form a little bit here this weekend, can maybe close the gap to Verstappen. I don't want it to be a runaway. I want these two to really go at it this season, as I'm sure everybody does, because we've seen Lewis Hamilton run away with the championship for the past however many years, except for that Nico Rosberg season. But beyond that, this has been Hamilton's decade, if you really want to call it that, in F1. So the best F1 driver arguably in history is going to be sticking around for a couple more seasons. I'm super ecstatic that he's going to be staying in the sport, and he has no signs of slowing down anytime soon. So your thoughts on the extension?
Yeah, it's just straightforward. And it's a bit older news now, so we won't go too long on it, but it was expected. It was always going to be a long shot that Hamilton retired after the season. I think the only way that could have possibly happened is if he won the championship in an absolute rout or something like that. Then I possibly could have seen it. But even then, I feel like he does want to challenge himself with this next generation of car. And when this contract is up, he'll be 38. I could still see a 1 or 2 year extension at that point, given where Mercedes is likely at, where Hamilton is likely at that point. We'll see. But the way that Toto Wolff talked about it, he didn't think that this is the last extension that he's going to get.
Probably not.
And I don't think Hamilton is ready to give it up by 2023. There's lots of stuff can happen by that point, but he's still at the top of his game at 36. He just won pole or sprint pole or whatever the hell we call it now earlier today. I think that he's going to stick around for a lot longer or not a lot longer, but I would be a little surprised if this is his last extension. But for everybody involved, it made so much sense to get it out of the way early. You had the kind of long drawn out process over the winter last time with the 1 year extension and everything like that. It just made sense, given where everybody was at, to get it done early and then deal with the other stuff the rest of the season. So happy it got done early, so we don't have to worry about that speculation and everything over the season. And Mercedes and specifically Hamilton can focus on the championship battle at hand.
For sure. Wanted to touch on that, at least address it, because it is big news that the seven-time world champion has signed for a couple more seasons. One more thing that we want to address. I didn't mention to you prior to the show. I just found it again. The iconic Alfa Romeo name is staying in the sport for a couple more seasons. They signed a multi-year extension. So they're going to remain with the Sauber name, but with the Sauber brand. Sauber
would be the name, right? In the preseason predictions.
So I wanted to just mention that, because
tough bounce there. there. But no, it is good that Alfa Romeo and that car brand and everything like that is staying in, because Sauber is an F1 name, but it's always better to have as many manufacturers in like the automotive world as you can in Formula One.
Yeah.
And so it's great that Alfa Romeo is sticking around with that Sauber relationship.
Definitely. I love the name. I love the color scheme. I love everything about that team, except for the fact where they are running right now on the grid. So, they're still they're a likable team, right?
You didn't prefer the Sauber days when they had a Chelsea emblem on the car?
No, I can't say I did, but
okay. I did like the Kamui Kobayashi, Sergio Perez days, but you know.
What was your favorite Sauber livery? Did you have one?
Probably like these ones. These ones are awesome. They're so good. So
yeah, I'm a sucker for blue and gold, but it was more like a brighter yellow, so it wasn't quite
I didn't
that.
like those as much.
But this car is pretty sporty, so I'm happy that they are sticking around. And then lastly, unfortunately for Zach Brown, he will miss this weekend for the British Grand Prix after testing positive for COVID-19. That's obviously a tough break for him. The McLaren's home race, obviously, a lot of different things going on this weekend. Lando Norris being a British driver, there's a lot of different things surrounding that full capacity at the British Grand Prix this weekend, as well as a bit of a trial by fire basis for the British government to allow this to happen. Hopefully everything is being handled safely and everything over there in Silverstone. But unfortunate news for Zach Brown, Kyle.
Yeah, it's just something that kind of happens at this point. Like even with double vaccinations, it's not 100%. He was double vaccinated months ago. But this is why as many people as possible need to get vaccinated and double vaccinated. So we limit the amount of people that are able to spread it and everything like that. So it's unfortunate for Zach Brown here. Hopefully he recovers quickly. There's no complications or anything, and he can be back at the track soon.
Definitely. All righty. Let's get into this weekend, Kyle. That does it for the news and notes section. We can get into what's already happened and what we can kind of predict what's going to happen for the remainder of the weekend. So, of course, the sprint qualifying format is debuting this weekend with FP1 happening a little bit earlier today at the time of our recording this. And then we had the sprint qualifying, if you will. It was an interesting kind of morning, to say the least, that during the times we were able to watch it live. And it was just your normal standard qualifying that we usually see on the Saturdays with Q1, Q2, and Q3. And Lewis Hamilton, of course, scored the pole for tomorrow's sprint qualifying race, if you will. It's a 100-kilometer race tomorrow. But before we get into the sprint qualifying race tomorrow, we have FP2, free practice 2. And that's the second and last practice session of the weekend. So not 3 practices this weekend, only 2 to try and compensate for the sprint qualifying race that happens Saturday. So lots of different things to kind of get acquainted to this weekend. There's lots of different debates on if this format is going to work or if it should be here to stay. I believe there's 2 more races scheduled, probably Monza and Brazil, what was rumored, but we'll see when they make a full announcement on that later down the line on the remaining races for this format. But they're giving it a try. They're going to be willing to listen and see if there's anything that they can change. And I'm sure that there probably is some things they could change. But your impressions so far through the weekend here, Kyle, on what's happened specifically now, and then what you're looking forward to or not looking forward to for the remainder of the weekend.
Yeah, there really isn't that much that's changed at this point. The main thing is just the lack of practice time. And that's something that I think a lot of people are on board with. The 3 practice sessions and everything like that leading into qualifying was always excessive. And the less practice time you have, the more kind of jumbled up or unexpected qualifying and subsequently the race will be. So because of Parc Fermé rules and everything like that. So for qualifying, after just the 1 practice session, I mean, we've seen what it's been like with 3 practice sessions with Red Bull at the top, and it wasn't them at the top this time around. It's Lewis Hamilton at the top, at least in sprint qualifying or whatever it's called. Anyways, so I like that aspect of it. I do actually like qualifying on the Friday because at least if you're in person, you have 3 days of competitive racing on each day of the weekend, which is big in terms of ticket sales, in terms of enjoying the weekend, everything like that. So those I think are all positives. And just looking at the running order from today's qualifying results, it's It's normal enough to where it's not like ridiculous. But you can see how just the one practice session definitely impacted things. And so going into the rest of the weekend, though, that's where I kind of have my issues start to arise, because I think having this short window to get your car set up and then go straight into qualifying is great. But then you have a 100-kilometer extension of the race before the actual race starts, where things will just go back to normal unless there's a crash or something like that. And in which case, I don't know how they handle a crash going into the Grand Prix. But unless there's a crash, I don't see how we're not starting with Hamilton, Verstappen, front row, Bottas, Perez on the second row, and then Leclerc, Norris, and all the way down. It's just unless there's crashes and everything like that, which I don't see why you would race that hard for 100 kilometers for a race that just sets your grid position for the next day and doesn't award any points unless you finish inside the top three. And if it does, it's so minuscule that it's the equivalent of finishing like 8th in an actual Grand Prix. I just don't see how it's going to result in fun, competitive racing in anything like that, other than maybe for like first, if we even get that. But even then, why would you go and risk starting at the back, battling for the lead of a sprint race, when you can go ahead and just settle into second, still get 2 points and everything like that. So I think this is like a half-hearted attempt at doing the sprint race thing like we've seen in the junior formulas like F2 and F3, where they have legitimately great sprint races with reverse top 10s and everything like that. I think the ideal format here, and the one that most people would want to see in terms of an entertainment perspective, is have qualifying on the Friday, have that set the grid for the Grand Prix on Sunday. Invert the top 10, have that be the starting positions for the sprint race on the Saturday, and have that go. That will be entertaining, but that doesn't affect how the race starts on the Sunday. So you still have a regular Grand Prix that is set by qualifying, but then you also have a sprint race where those top teams that qualify at the front for that Grand Prix on the Sunday have to work themselves up from 9th, 10th position on the grid. You have those teams that are competitive and have good cars, but start deeper in the field and don't have that chance, like your McLarens, like your Ferraris for the most part, to start at the front of the grid, start ahead of those other cars and have those battles throughout the grid. So that's what I would like to see in terms of a 3-day weekend with sprint race, sprint qualifying type thing. I think the sprint qualifying thing is kind of dumb. And the only way that it is a positive is if there's a crash, and we don't want crashing to be the result of good, entertaining racing. So I just think it's just going to be a bland Saturday thing that goes for 100 kilometers, a half hour thereabouts in terms of the race time. It's just going to normalize the starting grid, I think, in terms of race pace. And then you're going to see even less movement on the Grand Prix weekend. Like, do we think like somebody like George Russell stays in 8th throughout the entire sprint qualifying race and then ends up starting 8th on the Grand Prix weekend? I doubt it. Do we think somebody like a Pierre Gasly, for example, remains in 12th place starting for the Grand Prix? I don't think so either. So I just don't see the benefits necessarily to this qualifying format. I know they're trying to do the 3-day weekend to promote more things to watch, whether that be in person or on TV, extend the time that F1 is relevant over the weekend, I guess you could say. I just don't think that this is the way to do it. I've said it since they announced it, and I really don't see with this qualifying grid how a sprint race for 100 kilometers that sets the grid for Sunday is going to improve how the Sunday race would be with the kind of grid we got.
I think they're like halfway there. Like, it's a half-hearted attempt in a way. Like, they're trying to try something new, but it's not quite what would be, at least from a fan's perspective, the best way of going about that change. So
it's a 100-kilometer extension of the race.
I really do like how they've set this up, where there's practice. There's one practice session. Really quick, we saw them do an extended amount of laps in just a 1-hour session. Really, it was pretty impressive how many laps they ended up getting through. And then that kind of gave you an idea of what we could expect for qualifying. But Max Verstappen was 7/10 clear in the first practice, and he's starting second after Lewis Hamilton started to figure out some things and was able to really go go up the grid there and claim up that pole for Saturday. I do wish, if they're going to do the sprint qualifying format, that at least everybody inside the top 10 still earn points. Like, I just don't see the incentive of having the top 3.
But then how do you do it in a way that doesn't completely skew what sprint qualifying is worth versus a Grand Prix is worth?
Maybe you do like, that's tough.
Because that's the problem that I have with it. Like, you can't have it in a way where it's a qualifying thing. The entire top 10 still gets points, because then the person who's finishing first in the 100-kilometer race is getting the points equivalent to finishing like 4th in a regular Grand Prix. Like, it kind of skews what things are worth. So I just think the fix is to have a proper sprint race where you invert things. You have to battle if you're going to get those points. Like in Formula 2, we never see somebody who qualifies on pole, wins the sprint race, and then wins the feature race. It almost never happens. And that's what people want to see. They want to see different people at the front. And if you can have it where you maintain the integrity of qualifying, you maintain the integrity of the Grand Prix, but have this new sprint race thing, which is worth less points, but has new people or different faces in the mix for victories, I think that's the way to go about it. It's just whether you can get the teams to agree to it.
That's the whole thing, right? Like, it's not the F2 thing. It's F1 being the top teams being so against this idea that they should be punished for having a fast car essentially and having an invert, and they would just never get behind something like that. So it's a tough battle that they're really trying to really get into.
Well, I mean, there's 2 top teams versus the 8 rest of them, so I mean, they would get outvoted
if majority voted. Yeah, it's a really tough situation, but I think that there is potential here. I have
is there
to.
Though?
I think so.
I really don't think there is. Like what scenario?
Maybe not this format specifically, but a version of this.
But with the format that they have this weekend, what needs to happen for it to be a benefit to the race on Sunday?
For me, I look as the Friday is more important than the Saturday, which I think is a bit depressing.
How so?
Just because, like, I would rather watch the qualifying on the Friday than maybe like the 17 laps that I'm going to see on a Saturday, if you get what I mean. Like, I think qualifying will be a little bit more entertaining if people take it easier on the Saturday, which we may anticipate here because they don't want to wreck their stuff for Sunday. If they do take that more lackadaisical approach and they don't push it quite to the limit, and it's, kind of just shuffles things into the Sunday, well, then I'm getting basically a preview of the Sunday, which is longer and awards drivers more than what I will see on the Saturday. So I think the Friday qualifying today was pretty entertaining. It's usual qualifying. It always is pretty entertaining. And I like that we had the limited practice.
But like with what you're describing there, it doesn't add anything to the weekend.
No, for the Saturday part, like, I think that there's some fine tuning that needs to be done to the sprint race format if they want to do that on the Saturday. But I like the qualifying on the Friday. I like the one practice session. Of course, the Grand Prix is going to stay on the Sunday. It's that Saturday day that I feel like has been kind of lost in this whole thing that they've really tried to create here this weekend. Yeah, if that makes sense.
I get that. I just don't see, like, the only way that this makes for a more interesting Sunday race is if there's a crash at the front, and that's not something that you want to be necessary for something to be interesting, because as you said, it's literally just going to be a 17-lap preview of what we're going to see on the Sunday, and it's going to be the cars that are fast in terms of race pace will get those positions back that they didn't get on the Friday qualifying. They'll start further up on the grid. There'll be a red flag at 100 kilometers, and then they'll go at it again on the Sunday for the regular distance. And it's going to be more the same from what we saw on the Saturday, which takes away from what the Sunday would have been. So yeah, I get the idea of trying a different format, but unless there's a crash, I don't see how it's a positive for the end result on Sunday.
I am curious to see how just the top 3 handle themselves, because I think Verstappen's going to want to actually go for it tomorrow, just based off of how he qualified second today. I think he wants that pole position, gain that track position for tomorrow. So I hope that there's some sort of battle up at the front, but at the same time, I would much rather have that for a whole race distance on the Sunday for that battle than just 17 laps on the Saturday. So when I see what the qualifying results had in store, I would have been like, man, that would have been such a great thing to witness on the Sunday in a full Grand Prix, see how long Hamilton could hold them off, not just for a brief 17-lap stint here. And I just feel like it makes the Saturday less worthwhile because they can only make so many adjustments in FP2. So like how many people are going to really want to go out there and put some strain on their cars, or how much are they going to be able to really learn for only 17 laps for the Saturday sprint qualifying. So there is some flaws absolutely with this system, and we're going to see those flaws come right to the very top tomorrow. But for Friday, it was a successful day, but for the Saturday, there's definitely some reservations.
Yeah, like my biggest concern is, just from my perspective, I see it as a 100-kilometer extension of the race that in the end will end up taking away from the weekend more so than it would add to the weekend.
I agree with that.
And because
if cars overtake each other on the Saturday, if they can get that if they're going to do that on the Saturday to try and get that track position where we usually see them running on the Sunday, then what's going to happen on the Sunday race? It's going to be pretty bland.
Exactly.
They've already passed them.
By the point 17 laps go by on the Saturday, where there isn't any mandatory pit stops or anything like that, the running order will have been set in terms of who's fastest in terms of race pace for the most part by that point.
Yeah.
And then there's no tire strategy in terms of people who qualified at this point have to start on these tires and stuff like that we usually see on race weekend. So there isn't the strategy element that are necessarily there. Maybe there's a strategy element in terms of teams starting on different tire compounds, but even that would be a couple of teams versus the entire top 10 starting on used tires. And then you get to the Sunday, the running order is essentially known from the Saturday, and it's going to be essentially status quo unless there's crashes. So again, I appreciate them trying stuff. You try stuff in certain small parts to see what works, what doesn't going into next year. And then you see maybe making changes on the whole. But again, I just don't see how a sprint qualifying race where there's no inverts, only the top three get minimal points, all these kind of things, how it improves the race weekend. And I actually think it takes away from it more so.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's a really fair point to make, Kyle. I'm curious.
But again, would be happy to be proven wrong if we see great racing for 17 laps. Everybody goes in a hard sprint trying to get the most track position they can for Sunday, and then Sunday ends up being a great race. Could be proven completely wrong. I would happily be proven wrong because I don't want to watch two boring races. I just have a lot of apprehension going into the weekend.
Mm-hmm. Okay, last little bit for this discussion. Who's hurt the most by this and who benefits the most? We kind of talked about that for the 2022 F1 car itself, but who's hurt the most? Who do you think? We'll start off with that one.
Yeah, so looking at the grid here, and just taking it from the perspective of if this was a normal weekend, who would benefit the most from it being a normal weekend where this is the grid starting on Sunday, and who benefits the most from it not being a normal weekend where they have the opportunity to maybe make up some positions that they lost through qualifying and stuff. So I'll start in terms of who it helps the most.
Okay.
And it's kind of strange to say because he's starting fifth, but I'm going to say Sergio Perez, because the issue with Perez so far this season has been qualifying. That he hasn't been able to get up there consistently, at least in the top three, in the top four, and start at that position and be up there for the entire race. Yes, just make his way to that point by like the 25-30% part of the race. And then he's already so far behind that he can't necessarily get into the conversation as much throughout the race. With this extra 17 laps on the Saturday, we know how great Sergio Perez is in terms of race pace versus qualifying. This will give him the ability to get those positions and potentially start third or even fourth potentially, or sorry, the other way around, I should have said, but gain a couple of positions potentially on the Saturday and then go into this Sunday race and be starting in that third or fourth position that you would have hoped or expected him to do on the Friday or qualifying session. So I think that this format helps Sergio Perez the most. And do you want to give yours first, or do you want me to go both and then you can do both?
I'll give mine.
Okay.
So for me, I think it's a very similar argument. I think Perez is a very good shout. For me, it's Daniel Ricardo this weekend, to give him a little, excuse me, a little bit more seat time in racing conditions. That's where we've really seen him shine. And the fact that he qualified P7 here just behind Lando Norris this weekend
and
shows.
Not just only that, I'm glad you mentioned that, but he was faster than Norris in Q1. He was faster than Norris in Q2, and he was only 0.02 of a second down in Q3. So it looks like Ricardo has some legit pace this weekend.
Yeah, he looks like he's starting to find his groove. And we saw it a little bit in Austria, had a couple of slower starts where he couldn't regain that track position.
Had the engine issue at one point. Yeah.
If he maintains where he is right there, or even is able to, if let's just say the Ferrari doesn't quite have it on the sprint race format here, where it just doesn't quite have the race pace, I think Daniel Ricciardo could do something here this weekend. And I'd be very happy for him if he can turn it around and finish fourth here in the British Grand Prix last season. So has had some success here just over the last calendar year. So I think this is a massive benefit to someone like Daniel Ricciardo, where he's qualified well already, and now he's going to be able to excel in that format here and get those extra 17 laps that sometimes everybody's begging for, like, oh, if I only had like a couple more laps. Well, he's going to get 17 more laps here to try and improve himself for this upcoming race weekend on the Sunday. So for me, I think he benefits the most.
Yeah, I think those are two very kind of similar shouts in that regard.
It's the qualifying that's really held them back, and then the races where they kind of show their stuff.
And for this weekend specifically, you can look to people like Pierre Gasly, something that maybe qualified a little bit lower than people anticipated, and potentially can get a couple of those positions on the Saturday, stuff like that. But in terms of who it hurts the most, I think the obvious one is George Russell, just not having the potential strategy or anything like that that can be different. Starting eighth and only being like a couple of tenths off of fourth is insane in a Williams. But the issue is the Saturday takes away the advantage that you can get starting further ahead, because starting further ahead, you get that track position to start with, and you can gap people maybe a little bit that you're actually racing off of the start, and then they have to claw back to you as the race goes along, versus with this format, having the 17 laps, that happens and then it stops. So everyone's set back to the starting point, and that gap that you potentially get from starting eighth is all of a sudden put back to zero again, and potentially starting 10th or 11th, depending on what happens in that sprint race, could be a big detriment to what potentially George Russell could have done over this weekend. So I think he's the obvious one. I think the other one I'll look to is kind of in kind of the theme of what we talked about with Sergio Perez, Daniel Ricciardo there, is Charles Leclerc starting fourth. Again, similar in vein, where starting fourth, you have that track position off the start, you get that gap, people behind you have to get back to that and then get past you. With Charles Leclerc starting fourth, we would expect Perez to get by. We would maybe expect one or maybe even both of the McLarens to get by at some point over the... This
is a good look track for Leclerc, so...
Exactly.
We'll see.
So we'll see how it goes. But the point being, starting fourth on a Sunday, normally you'd be able to get that advantage throughout the race, and then would be more likely to hold on to it, versus having the 17 laps where he's got to try and hold on to it, and then the entire race again after that gap is put back to null again. I think that's going to be difficult for them, just kind of given where the Ferrari looks like it might be at this weekend.
Yeah, I agree with both of them. I don't really have any other comment on anybody else that really stands out for me.
I think they're the two standout ones. I'm not sure if there's necessarily anyone else.
I don't see anybody like outside the top 10 that this is like worse for. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to be people that are inside the top 10 that maybe overachieved in qualifying, and there's a little bit of unrealistic expectations going into the Sunday possibly. But now with the 17 laps added on the Saturday, there's a lot of potential for them to maybe drop back with some cars maybe going for it. So, yeah, I mean, I feel so bad for George Russell. Like, the one weekend here, it's his best qualifying performance in a Williams, and he's got the sprint qualifying format that's really trying to get in his way. Guy can't catch a break, it seems, no matter what his luck is in F1. So that was a good discussion here, Kyle, but let's make our predictions here for the upcoming weekend. So who's going to be starting on pole? Yes, I said pole because the winner of the sprint qualifying race on the Saturday technically wins the pole for Sunday. So Lewis Hamilton obviously starting first tomorrow for the sprint qualifying. What are you thinking here? Do you think Hamilton holds off, or is Max Verstappen going to give him a run for his money?
I will say Max Verstappen gets pole on the Saturday. And it's mainly because the Red Bull over these last few weeks has had that better race pace. I think Max Verstappen, being the younger driver of the two as well, might have that more aggressive nature on the Saturday, whereas Hamilton knows in his mind that it's not worth the risk for the minimal points for the track position, still starting side by side, assuming you would finish second in this scenario on the Sunday there. So I think Verstappen would be more willing to do a potentially reckless move into turn one or something like that to get that track position on the Saturday, or sorry, for the Sunday. So I'll say Verstappen gets the technical pole award from winning the sprint qualifying race.
I'm gonna go with Hamilton.
Okay.
I think he has enough for 17 laps to hold off Max Verstappen. There's a drive with him this weekend, man. He seems so determined by the home crowd.
Yeah, whoever's leading through turn one, I think wins.
Okay. It comes down to the start, really. So,
yep.
I will say, whoever's in second, if they can stay within DRS range for the first three laps, there's a shot. If it's going to be anybody, I would think this situation benefits Verstappen more than it would for Hamilton, because if Verstappen's in first, gets a good start, I don't think Hamilton catches him, but I think there's a more likely chance that Verstappen catches Hamilton in this situation. But I'm going to go with Lewis. I think he looks so determined this weekend with everything that's going on. Home fans, he's in his playground here. This is his track, basically.
He's got a part of the track named after him now. So
yeah, it's I would be kind of surprised if Verstappen could kind of pull it off on the Saturday. Sunday wise, that's a whole different story because it's a whole race distance, but and free choice of tires for everybody as well on the Sunday. So I'm very intrigued to see if they match each other on strategy, what they decide to go with. But since you went first for the qualifying, I'll go first here. We'll go from we'll go best of the rest here first. This is an interesting one because Charles Leclerc is qualifying in fourth position here. The McLarens are basically right behind him because we expect Sergio Perez to eventually get past Leclerc, whether that's on the Saturday or if it goes to the Sunday. I would love to see like a Daniel Ricciardo shout if he could pull that off, but I do think that Charles Leclerc is going to be the best of the rest this weekend.
Really? Okay.
He's ran so well here last year when Ferrari was even worse. So I think this is just a good track for him in general. When you look at what he did compared to his teammate Carlos Sainz in ninth, that's a pretty substantial gap in position-wise. So I think he looks pretty good. I would have gone with Lando Norris, but with everything that's happened to him over the past week with the Euro stuff and how he's kind of, not in quite the perfect headspace, I would say. I think that could maybe just be that little bit that's preventing him from getting best of the rest this weekend. I would love to see Lando do that, get a podium at his home race, of course, but I do think Charles Leclerc might just have the edge.
Yeah, I like the Leclerc pull. As you mentioned, in the British Grand Prix last year, finished on the podium with those terrible Ferraris. I would be very surprised if what happened this week is actually affecting Lando Norris's headspace going into a race weekend. I'll just say that, but I will drink the Kool-Aid a little bit, and I'll say Daniel Ricciardo gets it done as best of the rest. He is matching Norris throughout qualifying. We've seen the race pace be there for Ricciardo. As you mentioned, I think that the sprint qualifying thing with the 17 laps extra on the race on the Saturday will benefit Ricciardo. And looking back to last year, beat the McLarens in the Renault last year, finishing P4. So, and not far off from Leclerc for the podium spot either. So started 8th on the grid and finished 4th last year. We know the race pace is there. The qualifying has been the issue for Ricciardo this season. He has the benefit of having those extra 17 laps. So I'll say he gets it done as best of the rest.
Okay. Podium time for the British Grand Prix. Is it going to be another Hamilton?
We going 1, 2, 3
Bottas?
or 3, 2, 1?
We'll go 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
Actually, you know what? Let's just spice it up. We'll go with 1, 2, 3 this time around because everything's backwards this weekend.
1, 2, 3 is more interesting, anyways. Yeah.
But okay. Do you want to lead this one off, or should I?
Yeah, no, okay. I'll lead it off. Your British Grand Prix winner, I believe, yes, the 70th anniversary Grand Prix winner, Max Verstappen. I think that they're going to get that track position on the Saturday. And then I think the race pace is going to lead into the Sunday, and they will win the British Grand Prix. The fact that they were able to win one of the races at Silverstone last year with how dominant the Mercedes was is very intriguing to me, given how different the landscape is this year. And so Verstappen, I think he's going to have that extra little boost, not having that pole position, being beaten by Lewis Hamilton for that pole position going into the Saturday. I think he'll get that place back on the Saturday and win the race on Sunday.
I've gone with the teal for a reason. I'm going with Lewis Hamilton to win the British Grand Prix this weekend. No, unfortunately, Bottas is my Daniel Hemrick.
Who do you dislike more, Valtteri Bottas or Daniel Hemrick?
They're pretty much the same for me. I was just like, they're basically my comparable. They're guys that are in top tier rides that don't deserve to be there. So, Lewis Hamilton is going to win the British Grand Prix here. Like, I don't know. I just think he's got something this weekend, man. I don't know. It's been a couple of weeks since he's won a Grand Prix. It's like one of the longest in this entire turbo hybrid era. It's been since he's won a race. It's insane. But just with the home crowd, this is his track to me. And I definitely agree with you. Verstappen is going to give him a run for his money. And like you said, but in the race that he won last year, Mercedes had terrible tire wear problems. And that was really why they lost that race. And they were still within a reasonable distance. It was a tire war last year. It was crazy how much tires impacted the results in both races. If not for those tire issues, I wouldn't say Verstappen would have been in the shot within a earshot of them. But of course, he didn't want to sit behind like a grandma last season. So as he said over the radio, so I think Verstappen's going to give him a run for his money, but Hamilton's just got the drive and determination, and he needs to close that gap here this weekend. So I'm going to say he wins the British Grand Prix, hence Max Verstappen in second. But I think it will be a race-long duel between the two of them. I'm hopeful that it is the case, because that would be a great show to watch this entire weekend if that is what happens. But those are my top two.
Yeah, and I've got Hamilton second. I think it'll be like a 3 to 4 second gap by the end of the race, close enough to where it's interesting throughout. But I think the Red Bulls just have that little bit more. So I'll have Hamilton finish on the second step of the podium here.
All righty. Third place, podium.
Third place podium, kind of going in line with what I said for Daniel Ricciardo there. The benefit of having the Saturday extra 17 laps, I think it will benefit him pretty significantly. So I'll say Sergio Perez finishes on the third step of the podium here. Qualified fifth, so not even that bad versus some of the results that we've seen at points this season. But the 17 laps, I do believe, will be a big benefit for him, even if he just gets up onto that second row and only gets Leclerc in the actual sprint race itself. I do think he's got a pretty good shot at getting Bottas as well, potentially, in starting in third there. But I do think those 17 laps will really help Perez, and then go on to Sunday. I think he'll be able to hold that position. So I'll say Perez gets third.
I'm going to go with Bottas for third here. Just based off of his form so far this weekend, this isn't Sergio Perez's best track, I would say. And Bottas just seems like he's a little bit on this weekend, just being only 0.2 off of pole position with Hamilton. That's a pretty close margin when you look at being 0.5 back to Leclerc, and Perez is just right there with Leclerc, 0.5 off. So I think that's quite a sizable gap to kind of make up, but we have seen Perez shine more on the race pace. But if Bottas can maintain on the Saturday, I think he could probably maintain on the Sunday. But if Perez does move up to fourth for the Sunday Grand Prix, I think we're looking at a nice little battle between the two. But just for the sake of going different, I'll go with Bottas. I think Perez is definitely going to be one to watch, though, for that third and final podium spot.
Yep. And just a reminder as well, Sergio Perez last year wasn't able to run at Silverstone, of course.
Hulkenberg.
Yes, Hulkenberg was back. And so interested to see, because last year was the best car that we had seen Sergio Perez in to that point of his career. I'm including the McLaren in that as well, because the McLaren when he was there in 2013 wasn't to the same extent as what we knew McLaren to that point. And it was young in his career. So the combination of Perez and the car he was in was best in 2020, and we didn't get to see what his capabilities would have been at those two Grand Prix. And don't forget, Hulkenberg was up there qualifying super well and everything Loved like that. So we don't necessarily know what to expect from Sergio Perez here. He has had some issues at the British Grand Prix in the past, but I feel like he can make up for it this weekend.
Alrighty. I think that'll do it for the preview episode for the British Grand Prix. We've talked about it at length, the format, the 2022 F1 car, lots of different storylines to get into this weekend.
Oh, yeah.
But any final thoughts before we wrap up this episode?
Yeah, British Grand Prix is always fun. It's one of those kind of unnamed crown jewels of the F1 calendar. You think of Monaco as the big one, but Silverstone is right there just behind it in terms of the circuit's history, Britain being the home of F1, all this kind of stuff. So many teams being close by, like with Aston Martin there, their background, like their like backyard is literally Silverstone. It's so close to that track. So stuff like that should make for a very fun weekend. Just hearing all the crowd cheering for George Russell and qualifying and stuff is super awesome. So interested to see how the sprint qualifying race goes. I will be happily proven wrong, but my expectations are pretty low for that. And then hopefully we get a good race on Sunday.
Does George Russell get his first point with Williams?
No.
Okay. Debbie Downer. I think so. No, I think no as well. But okay. Does he stay in the points paying positions for usual Sunday for the Sunday race? Will he start inside the top 10?
No.
Oh my God! Double whammy for George Russell. I say that he can do it. I'll say he stays inside the top 10 for the Sunday. I think that
there's too many quick cars behind him there that'll be able to take advantage of 17 laps. When you look at Alonso and the form he's been in, when you look at Gasly there behind him,
Ocon is good around here too.
Yeah,
I think those three. And Vettel.
Also, just one last thing I want to add. I'm interested to see how this weekend format affects Aston Martin, because we've seen them struggle in qualifying a little bit, but in races, we've seen them try some very different strategies, and the strategy play is kind of lessened with the 17 lap sprint qualifying race on the Saturday. So I'm interested to see how the weekend goes for Aston Martin. I just wanted to add that in.
No worries. You got to throw in the good old British.
I mean, it is their home race.
Nice green car. It actually looks really good this week. I don't know if they've bumped up the brightness on it at all, because they definitely need to. But it looks pretty good around the Silverstone circuit. But make sure to follow us on Instagram at the Green Flag Pod, as well as Twitter at the Green Flag Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. We'd really appreciate it. Said it yesterday in our NASCAR fantasy preview, but the growth on the channel has been tremendous recently. So thank you all so much for your support on that side of things, and looking forward to yet another race weekend here, the penultimate one before F1's summer break as well. But for this episode, I've been Lukas Wacker. He's been Kyle Cushman, signing off for now. Enjoy the new format for what it is, and we'll talk to you for the next F1 episode to preview the Hungarian Grand Prix in 2 weeks' time. Enjoy the British Grand Prix, everybody.